You try to transition us away from the culture wars as a way to change things to the Great Commission.
Honestly, the best book I found on this was Rodney Stark's The Rise of Christianity. Now let me rewind. There's phenomenal books like Tom Holland's Dominion. They were all following Rodney Stark. This book has just been republished by Princeton University Press. It's a hugely influential and important book in academia. Rodney Stark, when he wrote it, was an atheist. He eventually converted to Christianity, but he was a sociologist. He wasn't a historian.
I read a lot of him in 2008, 2009, 2010. My local library had like most of his books. They were really influential on me on how to like rewire my view as a Protestant of church history. Because I had such a dark ages view of church history. Once we're out of that apostolic age, everything goes bad until Luther and the Protestant Reformation. And so Rodney Stark's completely, changes my perspective of church history. And then the historian, he wrote The Golden Age of Christianity, A Lost History of Christianity. Philip Jenkins wrote a few books. Both those guys really rewired my view of church history.
The mainstream narrative is that Christianity was a small, pure sect, right, of renegade Jews. And then for unknown reasons, it was adopted by Emperor Constantine, who totally perverted it, turned it into an institutional faith, and then imposed it on the entire Roman Empire. Rodney Stark just blows that narrative out of the water. He shows the growth of Christianity in the empire was organic, that Constantine's conversion and even making Christianity the official religion of Rome really didn't change the exponential trajectory of the rise of Christianity. This forced him and other scholars who were responding to him to go back to the original sources and see what it is that caused this exponential growth. One of the things that he talks about is that Christianity's attitude towards women was a huge factor in its growth, that Christianity didn't regard women as inferior to men, that it didn't regard them as property. He compares the growth of Christianity in the early church statistically, in terms of the rate of growth, to the Mormon Church in the United States right now. The methods used by the Mormons today are largely the same methods that were used by the early Christians. They were really big on evangelism, right? They were big on like one-on-one evangelism. The other thing that was really emphasized by early church writers like Tertullian, that Stark says, but also acknowledged by Julian the Apostate and other pagan sources, was Christians' devotion to service. Anytime there was a plague in the empire, you would find Christians out in the street comforting the dying, tending to their wounds. Some of them were doctors, and we call, in the Orthodox tradition, we call them the unmercenary healers. Doctors who didn't accept payment, who often died contracting the diseases that they were trying to treat. The Christians would tend to the sick, not hoping to heal them, but just to comfort them, to be with them when everyone else was fleeing the village, fleeing the city, hiding in their homes, leaving the dead to die, alone and afraid. Christians would go to them and would try to comfort them. What you're saying about Twitter and others, that's just the totally opposite paradigm to what we think of today. The anger, the hatred is not what won the West for Christianity in the first place. And second, Constantine equal to the apostles, great man, great hero of the faith. I'm not going to debate that, but not actually as important for the conversion of the West as people think. A lot of that growth was organic. So the political dimension is good. It's good to have a Christian emperor, but it's not essential. It's actually not essential. It certainly should not be our priority. Christ is clear about this. The fathers of the church are clear about this. But also, just practically speaking, that's actually not the easiest way to spread the faith.
Yeah, Starks, he mentions the early Christians being against abortion and being against infanticide, but it was coupled by their radical adoption of orphans. Those babies that were left out in the sewers to die, many of them did die, but the ones that were still living, the Christians went to the sewers and those places of exposure to rescue those babies. And so they were open to having a really big family because they didn't use contraception, and they adopted babies that were exposed like crazy. And so they had these big families. When the plagues are coming through, as you said, they're the first ones going back into the cities to take care of their pagan neighbors, which is like, are we willing to do that? It's really easy to hate your enemy on Twitter. It's really hard to love your enemy in a plague, right? And so he really pulls those things out quite clearly. And I also did some research on the first hospital systems, which really rise up in the Byzantine East with Saint Basil, and of course, it's happening everywhere. They're all following the way of Jesus, right? Be with the lepers, be present. Saint Basil's normally attributed with like helping the first hospital system rise up, and Saint John Chrysostom and others follow that pattern. It's a really cool deep dive when you see where did our modern hospital system come from? It came from really like Saint Basil and the Byzantine sort of section of the empire.
We think of it as being the Western church, and I'm fine with that if that's the case, but I mean, it would be very interesting if it was actually in the Eastern church.
Well, it's pre East and West. It's just coming from the Roman Empire. So we're all sharing from that source there. I think it was Basil's funeral. His friend Saint Gregory is the one who gives a homily, and he talks about how Basil created this paradise outside of the city, and it was one of the first institutions that addressed people with leprosy on a more systematic level, not just, taking care of somebody here and there, but at a systematic level. It had its own like leprosy sort of ward, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah, and it had a monastery and a church, and some people think it had a school and a way to train people for jobs. So all those orphans that didn't have, a family, they could be employed through this kind of system. So there's a lot of reconstructions of what that may have looked like too.
That's really cool.
Sorry, I had to nerd out on that for a minute. It's been a while since I've talked about it, so I had to get all that out there.
No, that's beautiful, it's all part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. But this is what brings Jesus to people. This is the Great Commission. It's not just words. It's the word takes on flesh, right? The logos takes on flesh. So I love how you really are critical of people like me and other people who spend too much time on social media, and we think it's going to be won through words and not through actions.
I think Saint Seraphim of Sarov just hit it perfectly where he said, "Acquire inner peace and thousands around you will be saved." He doesn't say you'll save thousands of people. It's not you. It's not you that's doing it, but the fact that you have acquired inner peace will in some way affect the salvation of others in ways that you might not know, that you may never know.